Hello guys, and welcome to Imperator Rome. In my last two guides and in the community tab, I asked for suggestions on what to make guides on. And one of the first things I received was cultures. Not just cultures, how to manage cultures. And this is a really good question because it's a very important part of this game, and almost every new player that I get into the game struggles with it for the entirety of their first playthrough, not really understanding it until their second or even their third playthrough that they go through. And for such an important thing, you want to make sure you understand it as soon as possible. So I booted up one of my games where I was playing Rome and took over a lot of stuff to talk about culture. So the first thing is, how do we view culture? Well, there's two ways to get an idea of culture, two main ways. Number one is to press the culture button over here on the left, and this will bring up a list of cultures, how it relates to your population. You could sort by the most populous cultures, the ones that are integrated. We'll talk more about all of everything that I'm saying, their happiness. The second way is to go into your map modes and pick out your culture map mode wherever you have put it. If you have not put it anywhere, you need to press this button here and then find it, and then you need to put it over here by first clicking and then dragging it into where you want it to be. But now that you're looking at this, you'll see our culture, Roman, is all over the place. But just note that just because it says, like when I look here, that this is Roman, doesn't mean that that's all that's there. It means that this is the majority population of who lives there. There are cultures within that. For example, if I zoom in and find a nice little spot on the coast here, we can see the settlement here of Ceresi. This is majority Roman of an area. It has 9 Roman pops, but look how many other pops are there. Sure, the dominant culture is Roman, but there's more non-Romans here than there are Romans. Now, it's because this is a settlement area, and settlements are drawing from slaves, and my Romans are going to avoid being slaves like the world depends on it. If you compare my culture map here to my political map, you'll notice there are large swaths, let me zoom out even more, of things that I own that are not Roman. For example, the Lepontics here. They fill a lot of my country. In addition to filling my country pretty much almost everywhere a little bit, you can see they have their own dominant area. Let's look at over here. We have Punic. Punic is also all over my country, but they also have their own dominant area as well. And there's, a couple of these. We can see the Macedons. The Macedons fill Greece, but also are in Italia as well, and they have their own dominant areas. That's not because I just conquered them, that's because they're integrated. And now this will allow me to lead into the culture screen here, where we can talk about the different cultures, their statuses, and how you should be interacting with them. Now, so let's look at integrated cultures first. So if I sort by integration status, we can see we have 4 integrated cultures: Roman, Lepontic, Macedonian, and Punic, and those are the 4 I made sure to point out to you. Resultingly, if we sort by population, these are some of the most common in my country. However, the Lepontics are beaten out by the Massilians just due to sheer geographical numbers. Nothing I can really help there, at least nothing I can help without trying. The difference between an integrated culture and a not integrated culture is that an integrated culture will, number one, be happier. That's the main thing you need to know. And number 2, it's that they can become citizens or higher. There are different pop types, and you can see them all here. A integrated culture can promote beyond being a freeman or slave to becoming a citizen, at least a noble if you let them. And you can see that right here. Let's sort by civic right. You see nothing really changes. Romans can become nobles. This is a default because this is our base culture. This is what we started the game with. I promoted the Punics, Macedonians, and Lepontics to being citizens, not nobles. I could make them nobles by, clicking here, and then I could choose what their max is. Everybody starts out with a max of freemen, but I can pick it. If you put them all up to noble, they get even happier. You can see it if we go to someone that's a freeman, those Massilians. Citizens, they'll be happier. This is temporary. of course. This is just a small bonus, but it is a way to ease overpopulation for a short period of time. Simultaneously, cultures get very unhappy if you force them into slavery and don't even allow them to become a freeman. You'll see I haven't done that to anybody. Slaves will be slaves, they'll be pulled from everywhere. But I haven't done that. There are reasons to do that, and we'll talk about that. And tribesman is at the very bottom. This is just saying, like, you don't really get to participate in society. You are always just going to be a tribesman, and you're not really going to work in a city or anywhere else. Only maybe special locations. Being a tribesman is great if you're a barbarian. It's not very great if you're not a barbarian. Then we look at someone that's a citizen. If we put them down to freeman, they can get a temporary debuff of losing their citizenship, which, as you see here, is a quite bit heftier of a debuff than simply being disenfranchised and lower from freeman to slavery. Slavery imposed will always make them unhappy and less productive because now they can't become freemen. But this is a matter of population control, which we'll talk about in a moment. But for now, sticking to integrated cultures, what does it mean to really integrate a culture? Well, it means a couple things. Like I said, they will be happier. You can see the culture happiness here. For example, you can see what it affects. Your base culture starts out integrated. For every single other culture you integrate, those ones will become happier, but not as happy as your base population would have been. And your base culture is going to become less happy with every single culture that you integrate. You can see here, I have 4 integrated. This is how much, well, how less happy they are. You can modify this with some text, and I have done that. But we can see the Macedonians have basically the same exact modifiers. The Punics are a little less happy because I'm at war with a country of this culture, aka Carthage, at the time of this save. You know, that can affect things too. But if I had only the Romans integrated, then the happiness, the culture happiness of the Romans would go up by another 12% because there'd be no other competition. So integrating cultures can make those cultures happier at the expense of your other integrated cultures. Now, when do you want to do this? Actually really depends on your strategy. So let's talk about strategies and how they relate to integrated cultures. So every single culture that is not integrated is always being assimilated. For every single little teeny tiny territory, not the full province, the territory that you own, there will always be at least one slave. There will be one slave or freeman or you name it. Something that is not your integrated culture, any of your integrated cultures, will be assimilating to your default culture. So, for example, this Phoenician right here is converting to becoming Roman. And if we look somewhere else, say down here, everyone here is already Roman. There has to be someone that's not Roman there. We have a Sibelian, he's becoming Roman. Come over here, we have a Dalmatian, he's becoming Roman. No idea how a dog becomes Roman, but there you go. And so if you integrate someone, actually, this does not cause anybody else to assimilate to them. They will always go to your base population. That's why I have so many Romans and not as many Punics, Macedonians, or Lepontics. However, what this will do is it will stop your culture from assimilating them. That can be good or bad. It's generally, your probably first thought is going to be, oh, that's bad, because, you know, then the Punics are just going to grow, and then I'm going to need to keep them integrated, right? Because they're going to keep growing, because they're going to have babies, and then they're going to pump out more of their own pop. This pop is never going to be assimilated into anything else. It's only going to go up. Whereas Massilians and etc., anything else that you have not integrated is just going to assimilate as a base. And as you do more and more things to push assimilation, whether it be passively in the background with buildings and such or text, you can also go well out of your way in decisions here and found a colony. And you could get things like this through events as well, especially as Rome, that will create a place where they will be encouraged to move to and then assimilate to your culture. But there is a reason that you would want to integrate a culture and let it continue to grow, and especially even actually prefer that their numbers keep going up. And that is that, you know, number one, they are integrated, which means they're not going to cause you problems. They are as problematic as your main culture is. However, if you pick the correct integrations, then if you come down here to military, go to traditions, you see I don't just have Roman and Italic. I also have access to the Greeks and the Celts. That is because, for example, in the Roman traditions, I went down here and I unlocked the Greek tradition groups. Now, how did I do that? I actually had to go integrate the Macedonians and have enough of them per the size of my nation and the amount of population already in it. They had to be a big enough chunk of my nation for me to be able to embrace their influence and thus unlock their tradition trees here. And the Celts as well, down here with the Italic tribes, barbarians. That's what I did with the Lepontics. I actually had trouble doing this because I had so few Lepontics as per the amount of Romans, Macedonians, etc. that I had, that it was actually difficult to get this. And this is why you wouldn't necessarily want the integrated cultures to be assimilated, because you can unlock more military traditions, which can give you access to more buffs, which thus give you access to more ways to unlock traditions. For example, coming down into Greek, since I have Punic, could unlock the Levantine kingdom and maritime traditions. There are a couple ways to unlock each one, but this is just another example. Greek kingdom probably has something similar to that. Yeah, Persian. If I had Persian, I could get all of these unlocked with this method. So this is another way you can integrate cultures, another reason to integrate them, a strategy, a very military heavy strategy. But there's some other buffs in here that are not just military. But that's how you get bonuses, and that is how you can get more bonuses. That is why I personally integrated these. But there are other reasons to integrate cultures, such as the amount of them. The only reason there's this many Macedonians, Punics, and Lepontics is because I integrated them. But what about Massilians? That's really high up there. Let's say I was having a problem keeping them happy. Well, there are decisions I can do, so this is a perfect place to cover this. When someone is not integrated, you have exactly these decisions. If they are integrated, you get different ones, as you can see. But they have similar effects. We'll go over those in a moment, but let's say Massilians not integrated. Let's say even the Punics weren't integrated. You know, that's a lot of population. I need to keep them happy. There's text to do that. There's general ways to keep population happy in general, but this culture happiness is a huge modifier on the happiness of population. Well, this is one of my favorites. You could give them the right of intermarriage. Big stability hit, but that's temporary. Every single province, or at least a bunch of them, that have a large amount of this population, the larger the better for these bonuses, will be able to acquire loyalty increases. Very good if your unhappy cultures are causing loyalty problems. And even, look, additional. So actually, yeah, it really is just like additional with dominant culture. It's more that it's not even showing here. So that would cover pretty much the whole culture. This right of intermarriage would give them a permanent buff where they would integrate faster if you choose to integrate them, and they'd just be happier in general. Now, not all of these decisions work like this, but as you see, this one also comes with a temporary, like 5-year buff of assimilating them. If we look under protection from torture, we can see that they become happier as well, but it comes with debuffs too, like slave output goes down permanently. There's no assimilation bonuses, but with every right they have, it becomes easier to assimilate them, and generally they get happier, except for this one right here. But even if they don't get happier, they're still going to gain loyalties where they're dominant. But sometimes that's not even enough, and sometimes it's such a massive part of your population that if they're not kept happy with just that, you're going to need to integrate them. You're going to need to give them at least citizenship. There's also nobles. This is just showing you what each thing does by base. Every population does something different, and I've kind of covered that in prior guides. If you want a guide specific to that, let me know and I'll make it. But you might have to give them citizenship to integrate them, and then that would be a jump from like 18%, which would be 12% if I had not modified it with tech, by the way, all the way up to right now 45%. Take off another 4% of integrating another culture, you know. Base, if you get rid of this 12%, we would have like 57% base, so then it would go down to something like, I don't know, 53. I'm not good at math. 53% if they were the first one I was putting up there. And so 18 to like 53, that's kind of a big deal. And then for those that are already integrated, I mean, giving them rights, additional rights, privileges at this point, yes, it can increase their loyalty as well everywhere that they are, especially prominent. They can get happiness and even output bonuses. But, you know, this is another thing. If I create an honor guard, which as described, they're renowned for their martial prowess, create an honor guard for our ruler composed only of their finest warriors. You kind of get the idea there. That would upset all the other integrated cultures, not the base culture, just the integrated. Municipal self-rule is just kind of like okay, they're citizens, but I still can't control their happiness. Therefore, let's take the places where they are most prominent and then make it a client state, because that will make them happier for a very long fucking time, as well as permanently here a little bit. It's a way to kind of give them independence without giving them independence. They're still loyal to you, they're just not directly controlled by you, turning into more of having colonies or subjects. It's good if you like that, to just take a culture and put it into one client state. Patronage only stands out because it's like saying, okay, well, as citizens, you'll do better and you'll be happier. But if you're anything under a citizen, then you're actually going to do worse in your jobs, because that's just what this does. Promote citizen administrators. This will make the whole fucking culture group of 11 happier. And this is a good time to introduce culture groups. There are not just cultures, there's culture groups. So you see, Levantine is Punic, Hebrew, Nabatean, and Phoenician. We as well have a culture group. We have the Italic culture group for Romans. Someone inside of your culture group is going to like you and be happier in your country way more than someone from another culture group by default. Now, I don't think by this point in the game I really have anybody else still from this culture group. I might if I look hard enough. Oh, okay, wait. Here you go. Unintegrated Italic culture. Base 20% instead of base 12% happiness from culture. So it's better. It's definitely easier to conquer dudes within your own culture group than to start going into other culture groups. That's when you start needing things to buff it up, like I've done, because I had to conquer so many things that were separate. I wanted to keep them happy while I assimilated them. That was my strategy. But speaking more about strategies, let's talk about the different civic rights and how would you actually want to assign this. Now, what I did is I just left every single person as base freeman. I did not impose slavery on anybody, because it's just, I did found some fucking colonies though, and grant some rights here or there as needed. But if I say took an entire fucking culture and said, you can only be slaves. This is good and it's bad. It's good because now the available slots in the country, because there is a limit, there's a demand for every population type. Your pops are trying to meet the demand. They're not rising or falling based on wealth. They're rising or falling based on what's needed. If you look at the Lusitanians here, 75% of them are slaves. There's a couple citizens, that's like an odd thing out. They'll get demoted when the chance comes, but freemen, there's 19.5%. So they're primarily, of course, slaves and freemen. Just ignore the citizens because they will be demoted. And if we look at, say, the Romans, you see they're still slaves. 33% of them are slaves. Now that's a much lesser amount. And that's because these guys can become citizens and they can become nobles. And they are a vast amount of the freemen that are out there as well. But what if you wanted, for example, to, let's say we ignore that slavery imposed means that they'll be less productive, less happy. What if we want to pour more and more buffs into our integrated cultures? Well, then we would want to set a bunch of these other guys to slavery only. Now this has a pretty big effect, as you can see, at 10% happiness off of what is only 18%. So you need to make sure you can keep them happy if you do this, so there's no slave revolts or anything. But this would mean, you see like right here, the Baharics, most of them are not even slaves. They could go up to freemen, and most of them are freemen. But this would make it so they just all become slaves. Now, that can't just happen out of thin air. This is an economy we're talking about. Increased slaves of Baharics means less slaves of something else. And so what does that mean? That means we're going to have less slaves of everybody else that has the right to be a freeman or above. Let's say we're imposing slavery on everybody that is not integrated. That means that the amount of slaves you'd see for our integrated cultures would start to vanish, maybe disappear entirely. And then you'd see the amount of freemen start going up. in all of them, because now the freemen would be available for these already privileged classes, making, for example, your biggest populations happier. So if you have really populous integrated cultures and you set them to be citizens or above, and like they can hit that as their max, and then every smaller demographic that you take over has slavery imposed, they'll be too small to really cause you any problems if handled correctly. And then, because, for example, the Punics have little to no slaves, and they're all freemen or higher, they're a lot happier as a default, like way happier, meaning your populous cultures won't cause you any massive loyalty problems. They'll be super happy, and you'll benefit from them being happier, the bonuses that brings. And of course, that would be at the expense of everybody that you're forcing to be a slave. They're going to be even less happy. They're going to produce even less money. So, gotta keep that in mind. I didn't choose to do something that specific, as you can see. But I was still a little specific, as you can see. If we sort by integrated cultures, you'll notice Lepontic, Macedonian, Punic, I got these guys integrated only for military reasons. I was assimilating everybody else, and that's why I really didn't care at the end of the day about their freeman status. I planned to integrate them, meaning I always intended there to be Roman slaves. I just wanted them to be Roman because Roman slaves would be a lot happier than slaves of another culture. But then, with that logic, if we look at the integrated cultures, they would be just as happy as a Roman. So why didn't I allow for them to be nobles? Well, that's simple, because this is where I chose to be picky. It's that I wanted the Romans only to be nobles. So I know, whereas everybody else is spread out between all these other pops, the 1,351 Romans, now you can see there's other ones here that are not Roman. That's because I take things over. They start as nobles, and then over time, they lose their status. Imagine you're a noble in Carthage. Rome takes over. Well, Rome is going to systemically weed you out. They're not always going to just take you and put you into slavery immediately. I mean, that's what happened in real life, but that's... Oh, actually, that is an option. I can just make them all slaves. But if they choose to integrate you and give you rights, they're not just going to systemically and immediately take you out. They're going to do it slowly over time, and that's what's happening here. But I know that anybody that's becoming a noble and anybody that's staying a noble is going to be Roman. So I can still min-max my own culture and nobles for max research points, because that's what nobles are good at, is they're good at pumping out research, especially. Look at that amount of research, compare it to citizen. Just because you can min-max here does not mean that you should, though. Like I said, all of this is dependent on your strategies. You can see also how every single culture here will affect levies pulled from a region if you're not relying on legions like I am. That's what these little hover overs are for. And then in addition, let me show you a cool another way to kind of see where your cultures are. Forget about this culture map. Just get rid of it, right? Let's find out where the Lepontics are, though. Oh, that was like a double click. That was weird. But there you go. Now, you've already kind of seen this because there's another way to get to it. Go into culture, and then, like, if we're not specifically on this... How the fuck do I get out of this now? It doesn't like that I forced myself into that. All right, here you go. So, now I have the normal culture map, and then if I click here on the Lepontics, whatever's dominant, it'll pretty much bring that up anyway. I just click anywhere to get rid of it. That's definitely a easier way to take a quick look than just clicking this, where it kind of like got me stuck there for a second. But then I can see exactly where there are Lepontics, regardless of who is dominant in a region. I can see exactly where there are Romans in the world. Look at it all the way down here even. I can see exactly where the Macedonians are, regardless of anything else. Other useful tips are you could just narrow down the integrated only by clicking this little button. I've already shown you all these other sorting methods pretty much. You can expand or collapse all, so we could save space when you're looking. Up here, you can see this is not Roman. This is italic, and red is not the color of Roman, red is the color of italic. You can see all your cultures based on what italic culture are they. This is showing me that italics are 40% of my country. Romans are 38.5%, not of that 40% of total. And this is the rest of them pretty much. Very teeny tiny amounts. I've pretty much assimilated the rest of my own culture group by this point. But it helps you see exactly what you have per culture group and per culture. And you can see this goes down even further. We can see all the Levantines we have, Celtiberians, Hellenistics. It's also good if, sorting through this doesn't really give you the best idea. Maybe you could figure out what culture groups do you have access to. For example, when you're looking through your traditions and trying to see, oh, well, let me find one. How many Greeks do I have? Which Greeks do I have the most of? And then you can compare them on the map when you find them and pick based on that if you want to, well, for anything really. If you want to integrate them to make them happier, if you want to integrate them to unlock tradition groups. Now, beyond everything that I've just gone over, I cannot tell you when to use these decisions. I cannot tell you when to use these civic rights changes and integration. I've given you general ideas and strategies, and without knowing exactly what's going on in your game session, who you're playing as, what your goals are, the loyalty of every single one of your provinces, and the happiness of every one of your cultures, I cannot definitively tell you when to use these. I can only teach you where they are, how they work, and generally when using them is good. So that's all I really have to talk about for this. There are some small things here or there to assist with assimilation or integration that are like buildings or something that I've already gone over in my buildings guide, which came before this one, which you can find in the playlist below or in the cards, etc. If you guys would like to see any guides on Imperator Rome that I haven't already covered, please leave those in the comments below, because coming up with ideas is difficult. If you have any questions, feel free to ask those. I'll answer them to the best of my ability, and if they're big enough of an idea, maybe turn it into a guide as well. For now though, thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.